Welcome to another episode of Boundary. Today we are doing something else, covering our first episode on ethics. And not just any type of ethics, any type of normative ethic. We are going to talk specifically about contemporary and classical virtue ethics. We are going to start from Aristotle's virtue ethics, and then we will move on to modern issues, that why does Aristotle's virtue ethics do not belong to the modern society. From there, we are going to introduce three modern contemporary virtue ethic approaches, which is radical virtue ethics, pluralistic virtue ethics led by Christine Swanton, and finally, agent-based virtue ethics. We will then compare these four approaches to reach a conclusion and see what are their advantages and disadvantages in dealing with difficult ethical dilemmas that we are facing every day in this complicated modern world. Let's first go over a moral dilemma that I myself found is very interesting. Imagine we are the young man in Sartre's renowned existentialism is a humanism, who finds himself in a terrible situation where he must decide between supporting his mother, who has now been in a devastating and terrible condition, or enlisting in the Free Front forces to fight in a just war, external rule that determines what justice demands. Moral dilemmas like these have put to test ethical theories and expanding the boundaries of normative ethics. Virtue ethics provides a distinct perspective on this dilemma. Unlike Kant's deontology that revolves around universal rules and personal duty and roles, or calculating and maximizing happiness for the greatest number of people possible in utilitarianism, virtue ethics can be captured by questions like, what kind of person am I? What sort of characteristic traits should I cultivate? How would a virtuous person respond here? At its essence, virtue ethics primarily focus on cultivating a good character or developing good habits like courage, honesty, compassion, and practical wisdom. A modern virtue ethical response to ethical dilemma one faces can be separated into several parts. First, one should start from the classical Aristotle's approach. Then one would also need to acknowledge the difference between the society Aristotle is in and the modern world. According to the differences, one would look at modified approaches like radical virtue ethics, agent-based virtue ethics, and pluralistic virtue ethics. Finally, one can compare these approaches to give a final answer to the question of what's a good virtue ethical answer to modern justice. Aristotelian virtue ethics emphasize the importance of cultivation, searching for the mean between extremes, although it consists of elements that are outdated in the modern society, like slavery, hierarchy, and gender inequality. To fit the modern world, pluralistic virtue ethics focus on balancing complex ethical goals. Radical virtue ethics turn to examining and changing the settings of the dilemma. Agent-based virtue ethics, however, emphasizes only the cultivation of one's characters. Each is adapted differently to fit the modern society. Aristotle says that the virtues arises in us is neither caused by nature, nor was it against nature. Rather, we are by nature have the ability to acquire them, and are completed through habit. Virtues do not merely focus on the acts that we do, ephemeral feelings that we experience. Rather, virtues are stable disposition learned through lengthy life experience and practice, according to Aristotle. Virtue is, however, acquired through performing virtuous actions, just like the process of making crafts. Aristotle believes one becomes just by doing just actions, temperate by doing temperate actions, and brave by doing brave actions. For Aristotle, a person's virtue character is excellent, then the right actions will flow naturally from the character's disposition. Thus, it is not about attaching our moral decision-making to some moral compact. There is no duty driving our activities, but becoming someone who has the gift of discernment. For instance, the ability to find a mean between two extremes and to act prudentially and compassionately in each distinct context. Returning to Sartre's young man dilemma, virtue ethicists will not set out a particular rule like always do what maximizes happiness, nor does it posit rules like never abandon your family. Rather, it poses the question, how would a virtuous person act here? The young man would potentially rely on a lifetime moral cultivation of virtues like courage, justice, temperance to identify what the virtuous response is. Note that, in Aristotle's words, a young man is not typically a virtuous person because you need a lot of experience to become virtuous. It is mostly the old men that are virtuous. But everyone in this ideal society, Aristotle imagines, will be constantly improving themselves to reach the realm of virtuous. Virtue ethics direct our attention away from isolated acts to the character or virtue disposition that will motivate those acts, and emphasize that the moral agent must nurture and refine the discernment through continuing development and reflection, as I have already mentioned. Now let's move on to the discussion of justice under Aristotelian virtue ethics. Justice as a virtue, Aristotle believes, is a moral state, going beyond the distribution of commensurable goods or the rectification of unjust transactions between individuals. According to Aristotle, justice is a state that makes us just agents, that make us to do justice and wish what is just. Importantly, Aristotle proposed that there are two types of justice, distributive and rectificatory justice. Aristotle described distributive justice as since the unjust person is unfair, and what is unjust is unfair, there is clearly an intermediate between unfair extremes. This is the fair. For in any action where too much and too little are possible, the fair is also possible. This is distributive justice. According to Aristotle, since the equal involves at least two things, it follows that the just must be intermediate and equal for something, or for some people. in the respect that it is intermediate, it must be between too much and too little. In the respect that it is equal, it involves two things. And in the respect that it is just for some people. According to Aristotle, artifactory justice is found in transactions between both voluntary and involuntary. The just in transaction is a sort of T-equality, accords with numerical proportion, not with the geometrical proportion of the other species. While distributive justice gives consideration to how wealth is shared in society so that the people receive a share in direction proportion to the individual's merit, a good person receives more than a bad person. Rectifactory justice considers transactions between individuals who are in unequal position due to the difference in transactions, whether it was voluntary through certain trades or involuntary through theft or assault. In both cases, Aristotle asserts that justice is being distributed in proportion, which means that the reward should reflect the circumstances of those involved. Aristotle believes that we have to allow only reason to rule, not a person to rule, because a person will reward himself too many goods and eventually become a tyrant. But a ruler should be a guardian of the just and hence of the equal. For moral liability to occur, one's conduct must be both flagrant and volitional. Conversely, an unjust act performed unknowingly can be excused, especially when it lacked deliberate intent, since those who are virtuous cannot know what is just in all circumstances. They could not possibly take the wrong seriously. Realizing the limits of law codes, Aristotle proposed the element of equity is essential when the law has not taken in account all the circumstances where it ought to protect rather than punish. As described in the legal part, Aristotle stated that the legal originally makes no difference whether it is done one way or another, but makes a difference whenever people have laid down the rules that a mina is the price of a ransom. For instance, or that a goat rather than 2 sheep should be sacrificed. While some people believe justice is merely legal, Aristotle did not think so. He argued that there is such a thing as the natural, but still all is changeable. Justice for Aristotle is not the simple adherence to law, but instead the reflection of a virtuous character exercised through the use of practical wisdom and civic engagement, through the civic frameworks of the polis, in which the laws and institutions encourage the moral behaviors of citizens. Justice progresses. Justice is connected to the broader notion of eudaimonia in Aristotle's overall ethical framework. A just community is critical to the virtue development of individuals. Aristotle's approach to justice incorporates an extended understanding of the moral character, citizenship, and the motive to find good wherever possible in human relationships.